All right, I think we are ready to rock and roll on this particular business. I'm going to go over here and make sure that I push this button like so things don't go absolutely crazy, and we can go ahead and bring the focus back to here. So, hello, fellow Sublime Text Fanatics. OdatNurd here. Welcome to this live stream. We're trying a bunch of new stuff tonight, such as these new keys I'm pressing, and hopefully I press them correctly. But that's not the only thing that we are going to be doing new here tonight. Now, if you've been following my live streams for the last however long I've been doing them, you know we normally work on package development of some sort. Last week there were some technical problems that stopped me from being able to do anything, and the week before that was a holiday. So we are back now, and we're going to be doing something a little bit different tonight. Now, I have been posting videos on my channel related to my other channel, I should say, which is linked down in the description below, related to build systems and how they work. And as of right now, some of them have gone up. There are still some more to come, including the ability to have custom build targets. So I thought I have recorded one video about that. Maybe in this video you could see, and we can go over preparation for that video because we're going to have some code to go along with that. Before we do anything else like that, though, allow me to press an entirely new key sequence. All right, well, so far that seems to be working like it is. And I would also like to point out that if you have any questions or comments on my live streams or any of the other videos I do on this channel or on my other channel, or suggestions for videos you'd like me to create or things you'd like me to talk about in the live stream, you can, of course, drop those in the comment section below or hit me on Twitter at OdatNurd with those suggestions, and we take them thoroughly underhand because we don't really know what we want to do besides our topics on package development. And so with that out of the way, again, as I said, what we are planning to do here is some build system prep for upcoming videos. So I thought a nice way to do that would be to work through here in the live stream the code that we would normally just paste into a video so you don't have to see all of the development that went into it to sort of see how a live or how I come up with the content that I do. So we're going to assume that we're all fairly familiar with the basics of a standard build system. Oh, hang on a second here. A little bit of cable malfunction. And there are, again, videos on my other channel linked in the description below for, what a shell command is, what command is, how the selector selects the build system to be used, and all of that kind of stuff. So what we want to talk about here is something a little more in depth, which is sort of a discussion on how builds actually work behind the scenes, what's happening, and how we can hook our own plugin code into that to gain control of the build system to do, again, within reason, within the realms of what is possible in the Sublime API documentation, pretty much any darn thing we might want to do, although most often the idea that you might want to accomplish is something that happens just before a build happens or something that happens just after a build happens or things of that nature. So I should also point out that it's getting to the time of year where it's starting to get a little warm outside, so I do have a small fan blowing on me. My sound checks seem to indicate that it's not too noticeable, so hopefully everybody else's ears are not or as sensitive as mine are to irritating background hum. And let us proceed along the way. So what we want to talk about here is, as I said, custom build targets. And I guess probably the easiest thing to do there would be to create a build system and sort of go through all of the steps. And I did cover some of this in one of my videos recently, but nobody but me has seen it as of yet. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new build system. Oh, do I not have that in the command palette? I guess that's one of those things I don't do hardly that often at all. We go to Tools, Build System, New Build System, like so. Now let's say the shell command is echo hello world, like so. Um, and that's good enough for now. We'll call this test build. That's all we need for now. Now I'm getting different syntax highlighting than what you might have, and I am using this package here called package dev. Highly recommend it. It says it's for package developers, and it is just so useful for other things. I've covered it in some of my other videos as well. But yeah, I would totally recommend this package. It's going to help us out quite a bit in this video. And now I'm going to go up into the, keep pushing the wrong key there, Tools, Build System, and I'm going to select the build system we just created called Test Build. So when I hit Control B, we see it say Hello World, and it's finished there. Now again, we can see um, shell command is this sort of a blue color. It's of course the command that's being executed, right? And what I can also do in here is include the variable file like so. And when I push the key, now it says hello world, and it has the full name of the file. And of course the braces in here are optional. They're not strictly necessary. Now, this is going to become important later, but shell command allows you to expand a variable as we see here, right? Other things also allow you, for example, working dir is another item, and you might use file path for that one. And of course, the working directory sets the working directory for the command, what the current directory for the command in shell command or command should be when the command is executed. So that includes the variables. It works with variables as well, but not everything can include a variable. Now, if we jump over to the help for build systems here for just a second, this is a list of, whoops, I pushed the wrong key, excuse me. There we go. This is a list of all of the variables, and we're going to see various things here. The following variables will be expanded within any string specified in command, shell command, or working dir. So other keys in here that you might want to have a variable expanded in, like say the path, these variables don't work in there. Or the environment is another one. Now the environment is a special case where variables are expanded, but not these. They're the names of environment variables, but we don't want to talk about that just now. But this is giving us some really vital information, not just for custom builds, but for everything, which is here for everything from line 8 to 15. The magic of a dollar sign followed by one of these keywords tells Sublime that a variable should be expanded. And in fact, anything following a dollar sign is assumed to be a variable and will expand out. So if we came back over to here, and instead of dollar file, I put dollar files like so, you can immediately see it's not syntax highlighting, which is package dev telling us that something may not be what we expect. And when we hit the key, it just says hello world. Now, what's actually happening here is when Sublime does the build for the keys command, shell command, and working dir, all variables in those fields are expanded out. And over here in the right-hand pane, this is the list of all of the variables that Sublime supports by default. And anything else is a variable that is unrecognized and expands to an empty string, which is why we don't see anything over there. So in order to put a dollar sign in one of your fields here for shell command, command, or working directory, you need to quote it so that Sublime knows don't do anything special with this dollar sign. So the text /$ when seen by Sublime, when it passes through expand variables, the slash is removed and the dollar files is left alone. But as we can see, this is syntax highlighting because this is a JSON file, and /$ would be considered a character escape in JSON, but /$ isn't a valid escape sequence. So what we actually have to do is use two of them like this. And now when I run the build, excuse me, we should see not that expanding. Oh, maybe that works for yaw. I've never really done it that way. You know what? I'm kind of surprised that that is in fact the case, because that should really not expand to anything. So this is those things where you don't see this when I'm creating videos, but I do try all of the things that I'm talking about to make sure that I'm not leading someone down the garden path, as it were. But we're getting an extra action in here. Now I realize what's happening here. Watch this. If I said that this was $path like this, then when I try to do the build, we don't see anything, right? Because as I said, $path, Sublime thinks it's a variable named $path. So, and we can even actually go ahead and put those back in because that does make it look nicer. So yeah, $path, Sublime thinks this is one of the variables that it should expand. So it tries to expand it. It does. It's not one of those ones that's in the right. It doesn't know what the value of that variable is. It spits out the empty string. Okay. And that's what we see down there in the build. So then you might decide, okay, well, I want to quote that. So you do this. Now, when we do it, we're going to see, and I need to, that's the key that I pushed wrong before. I just realized. When I push build again, you can see down there in their status line that says no build system. And I'll do it again. Watch closely down at the bottom where it says line 2, column 39. When I press Control B, says no build system. And the reason for that is /$ isn't a valid JSON character escape. So you need to do that. Okay. Now watch what happens when I do it. Remember I tried this a second ago with $files. I didn't get a response and I was confused. That's because of this. It's successfully passing $path through to the command that's executed, but the command that's executed is being executed by bash. Bash thinks that it's an environment variable. So what you really have to do is two more of them, and maybe a couple more. There you go. This is the $. The // converts to /$ after it passes through the JSON, but you don't want that to pass through the JSON. What you actually want is /$ to pass through to the underlying shell, which requires you to use 4 of these things. And that is a total of 6 of these to pass a $sign through to the bottom end. But this is something that we're going to, as I said, cover in just a second. But let's say that we actually wanted $path to be an actual path. You know what's bad? Let's go about it in a different way. Let's say selection is the variable that we want. We want $selection to expand out to the currently selected text. And we might even put single quotes in here like this. So if we executed, I think we need a couple of these. There we go. So now the command is executing, and we can even, let's even remove the hello world from this. What we would ultimately like is for $selection to be appearing in those single quotes. This is one of the things that you might want to use a build system for. You might want to create your own variable for some reason. Now here's another thing that you might want to do, and I'm sure the best way to describe how this works. Let's take it back for a second and go ahead and add a, see, this is source.json. So we're going to add a selector in here of source.json, just so that we can see this build still applies, but you'll see the selector key is red here in the package dev syntax highlighting. And the reason for that is selector is one of those keys that helps Sublime figure out when this build is supposed to be created, or when it's supposed to be used, I should say, not when it should be created. Um, so this tells it that this build is valid for files of type JSON, so that if the build system type is set to automatic, that's what tells it test build could totally be used to quote unquote build a JSON file. Now, this key is a different color than these because it has a different function, and that function is that. So what we really want to talk about here, though, is custom targets in build systems. So what exactly is happening when you try to run a build? Well, the first thing that happens is this build file is, as we can see, a JSON object. It's just a series of keys and values. Some of the keys are special to Sublime, and they will tell it when the build applies. For example, source.json. This is a selector. This build applies for this type of file. Or if you have variants, if there's a variant key in here, then the contents of the variant aren't used per se as part of the build. It's used to help set up the structure of all of the builds contained within the file. Or if you have platform specific type items. And an example of that would be if I said Linux and went like so and moved this up. And maybe we'll just do that for the purposes of this. We see the key named Linux there is red because it's telling Sublime as sort of meta information that when this build is executed under Linux, we should use this shell command. And I guess if we wanted to be, we could also throw in variants here and say, okay, well, the very first thing that a variant needs is a name, right? And the name is, let's say, sample. And then it needs something that it needs to output, and we could output sample like so. Now we can see the key variants and name here are both also this red color. So for example, when I choose build, if I choose test build, it does what it's always been doing. And if I choose test build sample, it should be echoing sample. That's not working either. I was doing some testing on this previously. So that's sort of a little, oh, you know why? Because this one is the one that applies on Linux. We just learned something about how variants work. That's interesting. Does this work better? Choose sample? Huh. People often ask me how I quote unquote know so much about Sublime or how I figured out what I know because it's not documented. It's 100% because of stuff like this. This is the first time I've ever tried this, so I'm surprised to learn that if the top level part of the build has a key named Linux for platform specificity, that overrides the one that's in the variant, because the one in the variant doesn't have a platform associated with it. Thinking on it, I guess that makes sense. Without this part here, we're saying that in this case, the shell command should be this, but the outer build says that it should be that. So that's interesting. In any case, let's leave that. So again, this is the sort of stuff I do when I'm preparing for my videos. So we're going to come up and that build is executing the top one, and the other one is executing this one. Now say there's, well, we'll worry about that one first. So when a build gets executed, excuse me. Yeah. When a build gets executed, some of the keys, here are the ones outlined in red, are used to tell Sublime when when the build applies and how to apply it, and other keys are actually the ones that are used to execute the build, which in this case is shell command working directory, right? Once it figures that stuff out, then something has to happen. And what happens is Sublime actually uses a command called exec. Now, if we go to the command palette and use the view package file command, which I use in a lot of my videos, you can look at default/exec.py. And in here, there's a command called exec command. This one here. This is the command that is used to execute a build system. And if you look at its arguments for run, like from here on down, these all look like options that you can provide to a build system. Command, shell command, file regex, and line regex for working with error messages and navigating them. Working directory, we can see that on the left on line 8. The encoding, which defaults to UTF-8, and environment. Quiet, which tells the build command not to output that build finished in or the debug output. You can turn word wrap off. Hide phantoms only and update phantoms only is used when errors are captured so that error phantoms can be updated when a build happens in existing files, or new ones can be applied after a build has happened when you navigate to a file and it opens it. That's what puts the error annotations there. Word wrap and syntax as well. And then there's keyword args to catch the path and shell. And the rest of this is the exec command. And as a matter of fact, if we were to come over to here and we can see here's exec target options, which says the default target of exec is used in the majority of build systems. It provides the following options, and here they all are. And as we just saw, they're arguments to the actual thing. Now this sort of jumps ahead to the aspect of this, which is the exec command is what's used by default to execute the build. But we can actually change how that works. Now, before we do that, I want to note something here. Okay, and we're going to go into the tools menu here, and we can see cancel build is grayed out. Okay, which makes sense because there's not currently a build executing. If I did this and sleep 10 to sleep for 10 seconds, and I choose this build. Now the build is running, and if I go up into that tools menu, we can see cancel build is now enableable, and I can pick it and it says canceled. And then it's disabled because there's not a build running. Okay. And we're going to keep that in mind because what we can actually add is a key called target. And that particular key is telling Sublime what command should I execute when this build is launched. When the target key is not provided, the default is this, the exec command, the one we're looking at over here in this window here. And when the build is executed, those red keys, and you'll notice that target is also one of the red keys, the thing that tells Sublime how to apply the build when the time comes, that all the other keys are passed as arguments to it. And the result of this would be the same as before. We can go ahead and try to build, and we see it happening, and it says that it's waiting down there. And excuse me, then it's done. We could actually change this to any command we want within reason. There's actually a little bit of a restriction there. I'm going to use by default the echo command. Okay, the echo command, if you are unfamiliar with it, just takes any arguments at all and prints them to the console. So now when I do the build in this file, I'll open the console, we can see this argument, this text right at the bottom. It says working dir home2martin.config sublime text 3 packages user and shell command echo to single quotes and sleep 10. That's all we see. Those are the arguments the exec command retrieved. Okay, because those are the only two quote unquote the only two actual items in here that aren't something that tells Sublime the meta information about the structure of the build. And you'll also note that although the shell command includes the text $selection down there, it doesn't. And even though working dir says file path, when it's passed to the command, that variable is expanded. I believe I mentioned that in my bumbling earlier on in the video. So The two takeaways here are the target command is the command that will be executed to execute the build, and um, the the keys shell command, command, and working dir have their variables expanded, and that is true no matter what the target is. All other variables in or other keys in here don't have their variables expanded in this same way. Now that the command is echo, we're going to notice I'll go up to the tools menu. Cancel build is, still grayed out here. There's no way for me to actually cancel this build now, right? Because, oops, I'm always pushing the wrong key there. It's not actually running a build. Every time you choose the build key, it just immediately echoes its arguments and all is done. So what we would actually want to do is create our own command here. So here's what we're going to do for the purposes of that. We're going to jump over here and say we want to create a new plugin. And well, let's go ahead and call it example command. Now, the target command that you can use over there in that dictionary is actually a window command. Whoops. Not a text command, and that's because text commands are for modifying the buffer, window commands are not. Now, window commands, there's one specific for every window. I'm getting kind of distracted by having this window open on this desktop, so I may need to minimize that. There's weird animations playing over there. Okay, the trials and tribulations of having instant messengers and stuff open. My apologies. So text commands are for modifying text buffers, which is why they have this parameter called edit, which you need to pass to API endpoints like insert and replace and erase and what for. Those wrap the edit information that happened in the buffer so that it can be added to the undo menu. And that's why only text commands can update a buffer. There's one instance of every text command created for every view, which is every open file, the input widget down here in the console, and so on. Window commands are specific to Windows instead of being specific to views. So there's one instance of them created for every window, which currently is only one. And since build systems are a per project thing and projects are specific to Windows, there can only be one project open in any one window. A target in a build system requires a window command. And window commands, any argument you provide here would be the arguments to the build. So we can just say keyword args here, like so, which is the Pythonism for I'll accept any arguments, just give them to me in a dictionary. And we could also print kwargs here, like so. I'm just going to save this as untitled because I'm going to delete it. And if we came back over to here and replaced this with the command we just created, which is named example, now when we run the build, the exact same thing happens as what previously happened, right? And just to verify that this is actually what's happening, we could say print example build, like so. And then come back over here and when we run the build, it says example build. So it's us that's doing that now. It's not the echo command. And if we come up to the tools menu, cancel build is still grayed out here. So we still can't cancel a running build. Now, often what you might want to do along with variables, as we've seen here, is you might want to add your own variable to this. Now, again, remember when I do this, the shell command that's executed, you know what, just to clean this up, now that I've shown that those are the case, I'm going to remove all of this stuff to put it back to the way it was because it's just a simpler file overall, right? So going like that, we are running our command, and when shell command runs, it is echoing empty because we want $selection to be a variable that we do something with. but Sublime is doing something with it. Now, because we're the ones in charge of this variable, we could throw a couple of slashes in front of it as we saw previously. And now the shell command, as we can see there, says echo $selection. So we now have the ability to extract the selection and do something with that particular variable. And how might we actually do something with that in the build? Well, let's sort of do that thing where we work up to it. And this is where I thought it would be interesting to do this part as the live stream, because when the actual videos come out, this is all code that you're just going to see, and I'll explain why it's working sort of overall. But this is giving you a sort of a better indication of exactly why we're doing what it is we're doing. Okay, so let's say we want to grab the selection from the current window. Well, we know this is a window command, so it has a self.window. And there's also an API endpoint in a window called active view, which returns the currently active view. I can do a little bit of that. Returns the currently edited view in this particular window, right? If we used that, we could say view is equal to this. And now we have the currently active view in this particular build system, or in this particular window where this build is occurring. And then we could say that the selection is equal to the view's selection, the first selection. But what we actually want to do is view.subster that, right? And now for our purposes, we're going to print this instead of the keyword arguments. Oops, selection. Because if you're familiar with my videos, you know, when I build up code, I like to do it in a piecemeal kind of way. And then when I run the build, we can see down there is no text currently selected. And now the text subster is selected. Okay. Now the text active view is selected. So we are now capable of grabbing the selection. So we don't need to print that anymore. What do we do now? Well, there's actually an endpoint called expand variables in the Sublime module. As you can see here, I'm going to size this build panel down. I don't think it needs to be quite that big anymore. But you pass it any value and a dictionary of variables, and it will return back a copy of the variable, the value with the variables expanded out. And the magic of this is value can be pretty much anything. As a matter of fact, we could even go like so. What can a value be? It can be a bool, an int, a float, a string, a list, or a dict. So really only makes sense for value to be a string, right? If you passed it a string with $selection in it and a variables that contained a selection, it would expand. But it turns out it also works with a list of variables or list of strings, because maybe you want to do more than one. It also works with a dictionary as well, in which case it iterates over all the values in the dictionary and so forth. And all permutations of that, whatever you pass in, you get a value out where the variables are expanded. So you could pass in an array of dictionaries where values in the dictionary are arrays of strings, and one of those entries in the array could be another dictionary, and what comes back will be the same data structure but with all the variables expanded out. So if that was the case, and maybe we want to shoot this over here for the time being, just so that we can keep, whoops, I want a little bit of that going on. We can keep that open. So we can say this. Now, we might say the arguments for this command are Sublime expand variables, and the value we want to pass in is keyword args. And then we need to pass a variables in here. So we might say variables is equal to this, and the key in here is selection, and the value is selection, like so. Okay, now if I print args like this, open the console, when I push the build key, Now the shell command is still coming out with no selected text, which is, I don't know, perhaps what you might expect. Maybe the code is broken. But if I expand the selection to actually include a variable, when I run the build, now it says echo expand variables. So we have successfully grabbed the selection and expanded it out as a variable. Well, that's great, but we kind of want the actual build to still run. How do we pull that off? Well, you can say self.window run command and tell it to run the exec command. And the exec command takes a dictionary of arguments, right? So if we do this, it runs the build, no text selected, about what you expect. Select the whole code. Now we're only getting some of it here because there's a little bit of an issue there, which is another one of those things. Oops, excuse me. So that has everything to do with the arguments being passed to the echo command. This isn't exactly how I would, pull this off in the actual video per se, but we can see we can now execute various things. And we're also seeing perhaps some other errors in here in the console. So let's go ahead and run that build again with selection as the selection. We see that, we see that. Okay, that's nice. Now, if we go into the tools menu, we still can't cancel this build, even though it has that sleep 10 in it. And again, if I build that, see, it still says it's building. It's still waiting the 10 seconds after doing it before it eventually says that it's finished like that. But even while it's doing that, we cannot cancel the build. Now, if you think about this logically, there's a very good reason for that. And the reason is, normally, when we don't interfere, Sublime assumes that the command that should be used to execute the build is the exec command, which is built in and it has special knowledge of. And if that's the case, then it also knows how to use the exec command to cancel a build. And as a matter of fact, if we jumped over to here and did this, we could see that there's actually an argument to this command called kill. And if we do this, we can see here it is down here on line 213. If the argument kill is provided and it's true and we have a process, then kill it and say cancel. That's that text we used to see down in the build output panel. But now we are telling Sublime, don't use the exec command that you know about. Use our command called example. And if that's the case, Sublime says, all right, I'll run that command to run the build, but it doesn't know how to cancel the build anymore because it can't infer that. But there is actually a key we can provide called cancel. Now there's actually two ways to pull this off. The first way to cancel a build is to provide a string of some description that is a command that will cancel the build. So now that I've added that cancel there, you'll notice that cancel build is enabled here, and it's enabled even though there's not a build currently running. And when I pick it, we see immediately in the console working directory and shell command $selection. And I can do that as many times as I want, right? Now what we're telling Sublime is, in order to cancel this build, execute the command named echo. And it will do that, and the arguments that it provides to this command is the same arguments it would have provided to the target command example when it executed the build. Because if the target command knows to take some number of arguments and use it to execute a build, then the same arguments given to the cancel command would be used to cause it to actually cancel the build. In some cases, this might be what you want. An example of that would be a situation where there's a server running in the background, like say a language server, and you've created, say, a package where when you want to run code, you don't run an external command to run that code. You just ship it across a network connection to that background process and tell that process that's running in the background, please run this code. And that thing would send you its output back and you could display it in a panel. As a matter of fact, I did something related to that as my Devember project last year. There's videos on this channel, a whole bunch of them of me working on something of that very nature. So that is, one way that, that happens. But if you wanted to, cancel it, then you would again just have another command that could send a message to that server to say to cancel it. In the particular case of us, though, in our plugin, we're using the exec command to run whatever arguments we were provided. So we know that the exec command takes an argument of kill. So what we have to do is contrive a way to have the build system execute the same command, the exec command, but with different arguments. And it turns out that this cancel key can have another sort of value instead, and that is an object. And in that case, we'll see if I come up here now and do cancel build, the output of that is the actual. Sorry, did I pick the wrong thing there? I think I might have. Cancel build. Oh, yeah. Okay. That doesn't quite do what I forgot. I just took the echo out of the target key. And that's a bit of a derp. Basically, this is providing arguments, new arguments to the target command. I'm going to change this to echo just so we can see what's happening here. Okay, so if I go ahead and do cancel build, we still see it echoing things because the cancel key needs to have some values in here, and the values we might want is kill true, right? Because that's what the exec command takes, like so. So now when we go up here and do cancel build, now it's getting all of those arguments, and it's also adding kill true to it. So it's augmenting. That's another important thing. The cancel key adds these arguments to the command that it's executing. It doesn't just replace them wholesale. So if this command went back to being example like this, then we could do a cancel build, and it would actually theoretically cancel the build as appropriate. So now it's running. I do cancel build, and it says canceled. And that's because our little plugin here is invoking the run command with whatever arguments we provided. We've told the build system when the build is supposed to be canceled, add the argument kill true. The exec command uses kill true, as we can see over here on the right hand side at line 213, to kill the running process. Now there's still an issue with this, and that is that this says cancel build here, even though there's not a build currently running. Now, as it turns out, the command that's used as the target uh, is responsible for determining whether or not the cancel key is enabled there. So if I said return false here for is this command enabled, then cancel build is just always disabled no matter what. And if I set it to true, then cancel build is always enabled, right? So what you require in this case is some way for is enabled to return true while exec is running a process, and false when it's not. And that is not really the sort of thing that you can get at without doing a whole bunch of introspection. So this really isn't the best way to go about a task where you want to execute something with exec that you might want to cancel. Now, if you were just using this for the purposes of, like I said, adding an extra variable in here, and the command that you were going to execute was something that knew you were never going to want to cancel, then this isn't a big deal. We could also point out a little something else here. As I said, we could add whatever keys we want here, right? So we could say version and say 1.0 here, like this, okay? And let's change this now, since we saw how that works, to be $version instead. Now, we don't need to do any of this, but we do want to say this, version. And we're going to write this first and then explain it. So here's the deal. When you execute a build like this, all of the keys that are read in our example, again, because we're using package dev, meta keys that Sublime is using to determine how the build should apply and how it should be applied. Blue keys are the ones that are being passed as arguments, and in particular, they're arguments to the exec command. But all other keys are just passed directly to the target command. Our target command is example. We've said it can take any amount of arguments. So what we've done here is try to set up something so that this version here, this version key is 1.0, and in our code, we create our variables as the variable named version is whatever the argument value of version is. And we might even go so far as to say this. So this is the value that would be returned if this key wasn't present in the dictionary. So let's do it that way first. I'm going to comment that out. When I run the build, the output is that. For our purposes, yeah, well, that's well enough. So it's actually outputting, what we would expect, right? Okay, so we do that, and we can cancel that build. And then we might say, okay, well, now actually we want it to be version 1.0.0 because this should get that value, right? So what do you think happens when I do this? And you might think that it's going to print 1.0, but actually you get this really esoterically weird message here. And you could chase down this code over here in this exec.py file here. But generally, the exec command has this run method because all commands do. These are the arguments that we have provided it. Anything that's not one of those is caught in the catch-all KW args, which includes the $version. Then there's a whole bunch of setup stuff here, setting up the output panel. This is the part that's actually getting ready to execute the build, making sure that there's not something already running, outputting that message that says building that we see in the bottom panel there, determining if the show panel on build thing should be appeared at the bottom, like so, whether or not errors should be shown in line or not, set up the environment, all of this stuff here. And then we call async process and we pass it specific arguments and then some keyword args on the end. And if we were to actually look at async process, we can see that it takes command, shell command, env listener path, shell is false. Now, if we jumped back to this, we can see command, shell command, environment, the listener is self, and then it's the rest of the arguments. Now this thinks it's forwarding keyword args to async process, and up here the comment says it thinks it's forwarding path and shell, and sure enough, you look at it, path and shell, those are the two after the listener. We're passing this thing an argument that it doesn't understand, and it is getting very angry about it. So in order to get this sort of thing to work, you don't want to get the value, you want to pop the value instead. That way you grab the value of the key, pull it out of the dictionary entirely. We can still use it, but then when it gets forwarded on, it works the way one might expect. So now it says 1.0 down there. Let's go ahead and cancel that build because we don't want that running in the background. Now again, that's still nice, but we've covered a couple of things here, how to create variables, how to create those keyword argument things there. So there's that, but still there's this whole cancel build thing. So how can we resolve that? Now again, if we look over in this exec.py, there is a lot of code in here. Everything in this, okay, it works like this. Process listener is something that async process is going to use. It's this listener argument right here. async process is responsible for actually running via subprocess popen the argument that you provide. And incidentally, um, the you can see shell command is handled in a different way than if you use command for one thing. And this is where it captures the output. This is how it's killed. And it also does this read thing, which is what grabs the data and passes it to the listener. The listener is the exec command. So the exec command is responsible for setting everything up and actually displaying the output down in there. Now we've figured out how to do all of this stuff. If you wanted to be able to cancel the build, well, we can see if we, look in here, it's as enabled says if the kill argument is provided, then you're only allowed to kill a build if there's one actually running. Otherwise, yeah, just always. So the exec command knows to enable or disable or not based on whether or not it's running something, which isn't something that we can do here. Here's another thing. Again, if we look at this process listener and we look at on finished, there's a reference to it here because when there's a problem reading output, the appropriate file handle for standard output or standard error is closed. And for the one where execute finished is enabled, which is one up, you'd have to look up here to see. When standard out is closed, that's what triggers us to call self listener on finished. Self listener on finished, as we can see here, uses set timeout to call finish. This defers it from whatever thread it's running in to the main thread. And if we looked up what self.finish is doing, self.finish is the thing that knows that the build finished and passed or not. One of the other things that someone might want to do is execute a command after a build has finished. Now, in this particular case, we have a command that does something and then sleeps for 10 seconds. This exec command can take an arbitrary amount of time. And as a matter of fact, what we could even do here is say print falling off the bottom, right? And I'm going to go ahead and push this, and we can see it's building. It still says it's waiting. It says it's fallen off the bottom. It's done with example command at this point, but the build is still running. So how could we detect when this build is finished? And it turns out that's actually really quite easy to do using the magic of Sublime, the magic of Python, because we can say import from the default package, which is the package that this command is stored in particular, not only the default package, but the exec module inside of the default package. Please import, sorry, this should be the word from, excuse me, from the default package in the module exec, import exec command, which is the actual command that does all of this work. That's this one here. And then we could say example command is actually a subclass of exec command, like this. Now, we don't have to say self window run command exec. We are exec. We can say super.run because that's the superclass version of the method we're in right now. And the arguments we want to pass are kwargs. And I think we also need to expand it back out into actual keyword arguments and not just pass it as a dictionary. And we don't need to do that part anymore. And now we'll see. I can't cancel the build. It looks like it's building, and I can cancel it. And now that's disabled again, like I would expect. And it still says falling off the bottom there. It says what it's echoing. So just like that, we've managed to do what we were already doing, but enable that menu item for cancellations, which is almost always what you probably want to do unless, like I said, you're not going to cancel the actual running command. Now we're getting a lot closer on this because we can actually say also def finish, right? That's the thing that was over here, like so. And it takes an argument of self and it takes an argument of proc. the first thing you want to say is super.finish to let the superclass method over here do what it was going to do. And then you can do this, right? Grab the exit code from the process that was captured. And then here we could just say print success. And here we could print fail. So now when I run the build, if we were to wait for the full 10 seconds for this thing to finish, when it finishes everything, we see it say success because the build successfully completed. And instead of this, if we instead said and exit 1, then when we run the build, we get error output there as we would have expected, right? Because that's what this code over here was doing. It's displaying the debug text, which is all that stuff. But also, this says fail. So now our code can do two things. It can launch a build, and it can figure out whether the build, when the build finished, and if it was a success or it was a fail. And at the same time, it can also cancel. Now, there might be one other point here that we might be interested in, and that's this. Maybe we want to do this a different way. We might say if keyword args.get kill with the default value of false, then killing the build, and we might even just immediately go super run kill is true and return. So this would allow us to determine, and in order to test that, we got to put this back to the way it was. So remember, we could figure out if the build was a success. We could figure out if the build was a fail. Now when we run the build, we can cancel it. The build still cancels, but we also see this killing the build. That allows us the ability to know when the build is being canceled, when the build is being launched, which is this one. As a matter of fact, we might even do this. Launching build. We've seen how to expand variables, how to add our own keys and use them for something, and how to figure out whether the build was a success or a failure. So there's a lot of stuff in here, but this is a pretty good base for your own custom build target to be able to do a lot of stuff. And we've learned some things while we were doing this, which is going to help me come up with the script and the sample code for that video when I create it. I like that to be a little better, like so. Now, maybe we might want to modify a little bit how this works as a boilerplate example. Is that something we want to do here? I really feel like I'm forgetting something that I wanted to cover here. How to kill the build, how to know whether the build is canceled or not, whether it completed with success or failure. Oh, I remember now. And that is this. Sublime has the ability to do something like this. We might even say 10.9.8 here, let's say. And I'm going to swap this to versions. So what do we think will happen when I execute this particular build? What we have been seeing happening is that it runs this and then sleeps for a while. And again, we might even want to just redact that part out for the time being because it's not as interesting as it could be for this. But we've seen it use the version in this key here as the value for the variable. Sublime allows you to do this, in snippets, it's called the placeholder, but this is the value that the variable has if it's not set. And since versions is a variable that doesn't exist, then this value isn't set. So when you try to execute it, it really should have, oh, that's right, because it's still passing it to the shell. But we can, hmm, hmm, it's not quite what I expected. Let's going to switch this to echo for a second. So we run a build. Um, oh, I know why that's doing that, because this should be args. That's been a bug this whole time. Maybe. Version is still, I think I lost track of what I was doing here. Um, and, oh, excuse me for just a second. There we go. Yeah. I'm not sure if you could hear that, but I have some people outside were talking kind of loudly as they were walking by there, so I just closed my window a little bit to block that out. Now, the value of version should be popped. So I wasn't canceling the build. So it should have said launching. Oh, wait, this code isn't being executed anymore. Right. Okay, so let's go ahead and clear this console. Working directory is that. I'm going to go ahead and comment that out too, because that's sort of taking up space for us now. So our echo is that. And I think that does make sense. We don't want this because we're telling Sublime we want it to try to evaluate the variable in this particular case. So now we can see that it evaluates to the value 10.9.8 because that's what is over here, right? Okay, so now we go back to example. Sorry, I sort of lost my thread there. We can see now when it executes the build, it's executing this because versions isn't a value that exists as a variable. So the only variable it knows about is the one named version, which it does that. But this now contains a value of versions. And when its value is empty, it gets replaced with this. And that's what we see there. So we might actually want this to be $version 1098, right? And now when we run it, we see the 1.0. So you might expect that if this isn't set, then the result would be the appropriate thing. But now that's not happening because of what we did here. So this part should be removed in that case. Oh, but that does still cause a problem back here. Oh, is that where I... Hmm, yeah. Why are we seeing an error here? At line 15. Oh, do we need to specifically provide a value for pop? That might be. No, I guess it needs to be an empty string in that case. Okay, so now we're telling it the default value is an empty string, so that's what the default actually ends up being, and that's not what we want. So we might want for uh, I'm not sure if you can do this inline like this. No, I didn't think so. Oh, sorry, this should probably be one of those, shouldn't it? Better about that. Mapping required. That's interesting. Now, the general gist of what I'm trying to do here, I just realized I sort of forgot that I'm actually was trying to explain a little bit of this because I sort of lost my track for what I was going to do here, is that I was playing with this the other day, and I've always been under uh, the impression that expand variables, if the value of the variable wasn't set, then it would use the default as we saw there, but also if it was an empty string, and that's not actually the case. It's not actually what happens. We might say v equals kv for kv in variables dot items if v, and then set this to v like this. Why does that say mapping required? Hang on a tick, because I'm going to poke something here for a second. I'm going to scroll way up. I can't remember. Oh, I wonder where I actually did this, because this is something I was playing with recently. Lost track. Thus. Variables is equal to version, which is that. Oh, I see what I'm doing here. How about that? That's what it's getting mad about. Oh, I'm a dupe. There we go. So this is actually what we want to have there. Okay. So that's a nice thing for that. So the idea there is this sets up all of the variables in some way, and this creates a version of it that only contains variables whose values are set. So in this case, if version, which as right now is not set, then it ends up being that 10.9.8 thing that we see down there. Oh, what did I do now? Was that not just working a second ago? Where is it mad? Line 20. Oh, right, because I did that. Phew. So, okay. We're seeing it say 10.9.8 is the default because this variable wasn't set. But if we did that, then now we see 1.0 as we would hope there. So that's a nice way to do that. So what we actually want here is we want to maybe call this base custom exec command, let's say. And there is this to know that the build is canceling, and we might say completed to do that. Now, what we might say here is self dot canceling, like so. And I might even do that just to tighten that up a little bit. So now if this build is getting canceled, this canceling method gets invoked. And now for this, we might say self.completed exit code equals 0 or exit code is none instead of this. And then we can bring all of this up here like so and say if success else fail. We don't need the pass there anymore technically for right now. And then we don't need that part can be done. So now everything like here should still work the way it did before. That's 1.0. It's still doing the thing we want. That's still doing the thing we want. We can see it saying success there. If we said and exit 1, then we can see it saying fail there. And if we said and sleep 10, and we went up and did cancel build, which you can see is enabled. That says cancel. This says killing the build. That doesn't think that it can be canceled. So all of that stuff still works, but this code looks a little nicer now. Now we might want a little bit more here, but first, oh, actually that wasn't actually testing anything because this should actually be base custom exec now. That's unfortunate. Base custom exec. So yeah, okay, that's still good, and I can still cancel it like so. It says killing the build. Now the build output panel was actually closed, but we go ahead and see the build results and see that it said that it was canceled there. If we add this back, then it still says 1.0, and we can cancel the build there like that. And if we said and exit 1, that is now telling us the fail. So now that part's still working. So that is what we want. I'm going to quit this and restart it just to clear the state of everything here. Because what we're trying to come up with here is the class that we're going to use in our other video. So now we can say class my custom exec subclasses from base custom exec command instead. And now this is the part where we just put this. Whoops, and this part comes back. And here we just do a pass. And here we do a pass. There is still more work to be done on this part, obviously. We might also add a running self args, where we might say def running self args. So we can see what it's actually running. So instead of saying launching build here, we would say self.running args, which is the dictionary, before we actually call that to run it, like so, right? That's good. And now, because of the way we did that, this is still using base custom exec, so we should really see, it should still run the build, but we shouldn't see anything here in the console when it happens. Whoops, that's not what I meant to do. I meant to do this one instead, my bad. So when we run it, it's exiting. We don't see it saying that it failed, but it still ran. And if we came back over here and took this part off, whoops, excuse me, it says it worked. It still ran it, but we don't see anything. And if this value was gone, it does the default, but we still don't see anything. So we would actually need to use my custom exec command for that. And then the next thing is def collect args. And the default is to just return args. And I think what we might see here is keyword args is equal to self.collect args. Keyword args, like so. Because we're also going to do something else here. Def variables. And that's just going to return an empty list like so. So what we want to do down here is say def collect args, self args, and then we can say self dot version equals keyword args dot pop version and then empty. We might even, we'll leave that there for the time being. And then the job is to, whoops. Here's the question. What makes this cooler? If it's collecting args, then it should actually return a value that's unique, right? Return args. It's probably a nice way to do that. So what we have now is collect args, and then we have def variables self. It doesn't get past anything. And here we say return version, and the version is self.version, like so. So now variables is equal to kv for kv in self.variables if v. So we can do that all in one shot now. Oh. The real question becomes what the best way is to describe this when it's actually being in the other video, which is the part that I'm sort of failing at working on right now. That part can go away. So now we're going to do that. So what is this class actually doing here? Let's comment this. For creating a customized version or customized build that operates as exec command does, but has extra callbacks for various build events. Okay. Called to tell you that the build is executing with the arguments provided, which is none. We don't actually care. Called to tell you that the build is being canceled by the user. Called to indicate that the build has completed and because I can close this thing for the time being. The parameter, that is not spelled nearly correctly. How many more of those? Yeah. Indicates if the build succeeded or not. And given the command arguments as specified in the Sublime build file, return a version that represents what should be executed. This does not include variable expansion. And should ensure that any build keys are removed. A list of extra variables that should be expanded in the exec command. So this is a whole lot of, when the build runs, if we're told to kill, invoke the canceling thing, immediately cancel and do nothing else. Otherwise, get the arguments, and we might actually skip over that one. Whoops. Want that one and that one. The arguments to the command are gathered by calling collect arguments for the keyword arguments that we were given, and we get the list of variables. The ordering on this could go the other way. We could actually pass keyword args to variables and then strip everything out that's not an exec command, so that's nice. The idea behind the videos is where the way that it's going to be structured, we're going to point out that the arguments to exec that don't apply shouldn't be provided. And then continue on with this code in a separate thing, which is why I want to have like a nice cleaned up version to link to, even though there'll be a shorter version of it in the thing. This might still require a little bit more genesis, but that will expand the variables out and then say that it's running it and actually do it, or actually do it and then say that it's going to do it. Now I'm going to assume you don't want the custom target to be able to stop a build from happening, and you don't want to be able to stop a cancel, so it's enough to say that it's happening and provide the information. Maybe we can, yeah, I think I like it better the other way. If this is meant to be a customized exec command, self, then this would be self args. Return a list of extra variables that should be expanded. The args provided, and we're going to remove this one entirely because we're going to fix it ourselves, are the arguments that were given to the target, which represent keys in the Sublime build file. And we'll wrap that out like so. Save that up. We actually just want to say this. Now, I think there was a reason why I was doing it the other way, and that is this whole // thing isn't as nice as it could be. But the only way around that is to use something like my shell command so that Sublime doesn't fiddle with the contents. I don't like that as I used to like that, but now I don't like it as much. So we're going to pass that in. The args to the command are going to be expanding the variables given from up there. And then we need to do something akin to Python remove all dict keys not in a list. Remove, if a key exists in dictionary, then dict pop removes the element. Okay. What is the best way to pull this off? Simply construct a new dictionary. Oh, that's probably the nicer way to go, isn't it? So let's go ahead and args equals kv for kv in args.items if k in ex. A little bit of that, and I think we then need up here one of these. And what does this actually take as arguments? It takes command, shell command, env, that's async processing, pardon me. Command, shell command. Let's do it in the same order here. File regex, line regex, working dir. Maybe we do that, huh? Encoding, env, quiet, kill, update, phantoms only, word wrap, syntax, path, shell. Those are all of the keys. This should actually be up here. That are handled. So anything that's not all explicitly in that list will get removed. So we're not going to have this anymore. What we're going to have is args.get version instead of this. And we actually want this to be my custom exec instead. And we're going to quit and restart to make sure that it's clean. And I just realized there's a couple other things I wanted to cover in this. So run the build, local variable args record before it's time. Oh, whoops. That is on line 53. I totally broke my codes. This should be kwargs, excuse me. So now 10.9.8, it said it was a success. And if this was an exit 1, then that's a failure. And this says, whoops, that's not, that's terminus. Pardon me. I meant to push that one. It said it was a fail. And if there was a sleep 10, then we can still cancel the build. That says cancel. That says canceling the build. And if that was a sleep 1, wait 1 second, says it's done, says success. So that stuff still all works there for this. Now there's a couple of other things I wanted to cover here. And see, these ones you don't even need realistically. If you only wanted to know set up variables, you use this one. If you wanted to know if it completed, you include that. If you wanted to know if it's canceling, use that. If you want to know it's running, do this. If you had a bunch of different custom execs, this is a nice way to go about that. There's a couple of other things here. One is this. Maybe you don't want this build output panel to be here like that. I have a solution for how that could be stopped. Now again, I have to view package file over here and go to exec.py in the actual command that does this. Now there's a couple of things that I actually wanted to cover here that I haven't covered just as yet. And one of them is this: show panel on build is Sublime load settings this dot get show panel on build defaults to true. And if it's set to true, then show the output panel. Maybe you don't want that to happen. How might we fiddle that? Now, this setting is totally currently turned on, right? I'm gonna try this. We're gonna say, and this is not what we're gonna put in the final version of code, is equal to sublime.load settings. And the settings to load are preferences.sublime-settings, like so. And I'm going to say settings.set show panel on build false. And then set it back to true. Now we're not modifying the settings, so if I opened the user preferences.sublime settings, which is mine, like so. Hello, Mr. Crazy Guitarist. Just to see what would happen here if I actually build this. It says build finished, it says success, and I think we should actually see the build output. It didn't modify that. I'm going to change that to 1, like so. I build, it says build finished, and the build results say it worked. So this is a great way actually to stop this from doing that. Now, this is sort of one of the issues with overriding the exec command to be able to run a build, is that it sort of depends on the user having this setting set to the way they want. One of the reasons I am coding in Sublime Text right now, and in the programming language Python, as a matter of fact. We're working on a custom build system for Sublime Text, if you're familiar with that, how to run your own programs from it. Now, the default exec wants to display the panel based on that setting. Sometimes you want to run an external program that you don't care about the output. For example, if you are launching your browser. So this is one way you could get around that. Now, this is actually kind of what this should actually be doing, is capturing the value from the settings and then only setting it to false and resetting it if it was actually set. But because we're not calling Sublime.save settings, the actual settings file isn't modified on disk at all here. which is sort of what you want there. It's just sort of a temporary in-memory thing, which is basically turning this setting off just long enough for the code in exec to do its stuff over here, and then by the time it comes back, it's done. Now, there's one other aspect to this, but we don't really have what what sister am I using? I'm not sure what you mean. Oh, distro. Ah, okay. I actually use a Slackware as my Linux distribution. I'm not sure that there's necessarily an advantage, except that it's just sort of the operating system that I've been using for, uh, oh man, I'm old. It's been about 20 years now. I do have two Windows laptops and a MacBook and a Chromebook on my desk, and I develop on all of them, but most of the development I do is on Linux. If nothing else, it's the one computer that's not a laptop, so it's got a nice clicky keyboard for me to fiddle around with. So there's that. What distribution do you use, Mr. Crazy Guitarist? And whoops. There we go. I think that's. Oh, the other thing that I wanted to cover here is this whole way down here. There's this exec event lister. Kali Linux, huh? I've heard of that, but I've never actually used it. Most of the Linux that I've done has been Slackware. I spent a little bit of time using Red Hat a long, long time ago, and I very briefly tried installing Ubuntu on one of my older laptops, but I wasn't really a fan of how it worked because I'm used to using Slackware, where I know how to edit RC files in the etc directory to configure things. So I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what setting and what dialog I was supposed to be using to configure something instead of just knowing how to edit the file itself. I'm actually thinking of maybe switching to CentOS because I have a new computer, a new Dell box that I haven't set up yet. I'm sort of deciding if I want to try to go that route because we're doing a lot of stuff with that at work at the moment. Native penetration testing tools, huh? I haven't really done a lot of that. Only for an iOS project I was working on a few years back. We were doing various tests to see if anybody could break our app by tapping on it randomly. Going to do a little bit of that. Now, the one other thing that we haven't really covered here is this exec event listener, which is something that you would need to implement if you have the option to show build errors inline turned on. Then what you would see is if the build generated an error message to the build output panel. Do I have that in here? No. If this generated a build error and you double clicked on it, that would cause it to open the file. And when the file loads, this event listener runs exec update phantoms only to actually populate the error messages in. So this won't work the way that it's outlined right now because my custom exec command is the command that's executing the build. So it's the one that knows about all of the errors that have appeared. And so that would block this from working. But I'm not sure how to solve that in the general case. Professionally, actually, most of the software that I develop at work is developed in Objective-C, even though we work on it in Linux. But recently, we've moved into doing some web front-end type things using Node.js and Angular. So we're doing a lot of TypeScript. But most of my day is spent using Objective-C on Linux and C Sharp on Windows. Matter of fact, our software goes far enough back into the murky depths of time that Mac OS X or Mac OS 10, however you want to say that, didn't actually even exist yet. We were working on this way back in the days of the original Next Cube, those tiny little magnesium boxes, which I believe was the company that uh, Steve Jobs started when he left Apple a long time ago. And then he came back and Next turned into OpenStep, which eventually Next Step turned into OpenStep, which eventually turned into Mac OS X. So we used to actually be able to run our software on actual Next cubes, and then we ported it to the GNU Objective-C compiler and ran it on Sun systems, and now we run it on Linux. And we're still using Objective-C, even though Apple is trying to eject Objective-C from the landscape in favor of Swift. But when you have a large code base, you can't just throw your code away, as much as you might like to. Do you program professionally, Mr. Crazy Guitarist? Now, I think the last thing we want to cover here, because it is almost time to call the stream, is you would also want to say something like my custom exec listener, which does this, and instead of using exec, uses my custom exec, like so. I don't know that there's a nice way to abstract this away. Looking to get a Python gig, huh? I gotta say, I think I'm being turned into a full stack web developer, but for the project that we're currently working on. But I've spent so much time working on back end server stuff that it's kind of driving me crazy that I have to be responsible for the part that people look at and not just the part that provides data to the part that people look at, because I seem to be involved in making a web application that looks nice. And as a software developer, I know how to make code look nice, but I have a hard time making a web page that doesn't make you run away in horror when you look at it. It is an interesting learning experience, learning all of the new libraries and other, you know, aspects of that stuff. And in particular, I hadn't really played with Docker very much, but I am slowly being turned into the local Docker expert. Ah, yes, templates. I think my company is one of those companies that should have someone that is designing things, but instead they'd have somebody that slaps you on the wrist and says, hey, these items aren't 8 pixels apart. But they don't help you with saying what it should look like other than that. They just say that that doesn't look as nice as it should. But I think this sort of thing is sort of new for a lot of the part of the company we're working in, because it's mostly been traditional financial software up until now. So it's a little bit of a learning experience for everybody involved. so, so I think we have come to the end of tonight's live stream action. We've actually come up with a fairly nice, I think, abstraction away from how to create your own custom build target, which I think should come in handy for upcoming videos. What do I think about Dockerization? Oh, I have a lot of thoughts about Docker. Mostly, I'm irritated at how much RAM it uses on this laptop that I've been given that doesn't have nearly enough RAM for Docker. It seems to be a nice operation for like that whole, containerized thing, because we do have an architecture that lends itself to being able to plug things in. It's another one of those things where, I don't know that there's enough people in the project that know the ins and outs of this. But yeah, that we're aiming for that whole scalability operation on this stuff. At the moment, we're just sort of working on how the whole application should actually be structured and what it's actually going to do and how it's going to do it. But we do like to keep an eye towards, you know, that whole aspect, because we're going to take over the world, or at least sell some software to some companies that need financial data and ways to manage it. If you don't mind my asking, Mr. Crazy Guitarist, how did you find my live stream? Does it pop up on YouTube somewhere? Not a lot of people tend to pop in on these things. People seem to want to watch them after I'm done talking to myself like a fool. Ow. And how are we doing there? Ah, wow. Welcome. If you're interested in becoming a Sublime Text package developer, I do one of these things every Monday night. Not usually, well, normally I work on packages and I answer, questions that people have about using Sublime Text or Sublime Text uh, package development and plugin development and things of that nature. Ouch. And there are a lot of untapped resources on the internet. There's so much stuff and it's hard to find it, but I like to throw out some help wherever I can. I spend a lot of time on the Sublime Text forums and on Stack Overflow answering these sorts of questions. And I also have another channel where I just post less rambly videos that are more polished than these live streams, talking about various topics in Sublime Text. But I think the Oh, thank you very much for the subscription, sir. It is, in fact, time to call an end to tonight's live stream because I have so many meetings tomorrow morning and I still have some chores to do around the house. But thank you for popping in on the stream and subscribing. And I hope you, watch videos and come up with questions that you might like answered. And if you have any questions on any of the videos on this channel or on my alternate channel, or suggestions for videos or live stream topics, you can drop those down in the comments section below, or you can hit me on Twitter at OdatNurd with those suggestions. I take all suggestions very seriously and try to do what I can to put information out there into the Sublime universe so that everybody can be a Sublime Text fanatic and master. Or at least as close as we can get. And Python, yes, indeed. I'm always building on my Python experience. I do actually have plans to construct a full-on course I've been working on for a long period of time on Sublime Text package development and all of the topics that you have to go through. But it is a long, slow process that we're just sort of chipping away at the edges at with these videos. So thank you so much for watching now and subscribing. Thank you, Mr. Crazy Guitarist. And this is OdatNurd thanking you for watching the live stream. Remember to subscribe and thumb videos as you find appropriate. And until the next live stream or video, have a sublime day.